So, hi everyone. Thanks for being here. I do have YouTube comments flying next to me. I will do my best to look at those while I'm speaking today. I wanted to first, before I launch into this lovely little slideshow that I created, wanted to just say thank you so much for being here. You could have done so many other things with your time right now, and I'm aware of that. I know time is valuable and attention is precious. So I just want to thank you for being here. And I just really want to invite folks to take from this what you will, recognizing that this is all emerging for me too. So my hope today is that there's something in here that might be a little nourishing, that might be a little hope inspiring, might be a little, I don't know, might offer a moment where you could take a breath. Because if there's anything I want more in life, it is to offer folks a little bit of a deep breath in all of this world that we live in. And it is quite hilariously and awfully awful a lot of the time. So here's hoping that this is helpful. So today is Magic of the Heart. We're going to make sure that I can actually share with you my presentation that I worked so diligently on. Also, I will be more than happy to share this with other folks afterwards. I'll save it as a PDF if folks want to use it later. I actually have structured today as sort of a talk a little bit about myself, talk a little bit about Magic of the Heart. I've included a lot of prompts for journaling and for work that you might do later, because I know that sometimes it can be a lot to take in the moment, or maybe not. So I wanted to have this be a very immersive experience and one that maybe you take out into your own world later. Also, I come from reclaiming witchcraft. I'll say a little bit about that later. A lot of my presentations and teaching are participatory. So please get in the chat, do the things. I'm going to watch it and see what I see and repeat things out loud for folks who aren't. It's a lot of stimulus to look at both. I will do that. And I just invite you to do what feels good for you today. Grab a drink of your choice, whatever time and space this is, and relax in. And I hope that you enjoy it and that maybe I've offered something that's helpful. So, Magic of the Heart, in case you haven't heard that enough yet. I'm Irisanya Moon, and I'm super excited that I've been invited here and to talk about something that is very near and dear to me and that is emerging for me and that I feel is bringing me out of the places that have been really dark and desperate. So I can't imagine I'm the only one. So one of the things that I love to do when immersing myself in this work is to find touchstones of quotes. And on my Instagram account, I usually post a quote every Monday along with some of my, I don't want to say ramblings because that sounds a little dismissive of myself, but ramblings in relation to that quote and just kind of what's on my mind and an invitation for maybe you two to dive into that work. I'm going to do my best to describe the visuals, but a lot of them are just a lot of words. And those are words that I will be saying. So thank you for asking that. So the first slide that I have is a quote. And this is actually a quote I posted a couple weeks ago. What would love have me do today? Jack Kornfield. I'm going to use a lot of love and heart language. And so those are not necessarily interchangeable so much as they are so connected. I don't feel like I can disconnect them, if that makes sense. So first things first, we got to talk about why the heck I'm actually talking about this. So right now there's a video on the screen that is showing a heart in action and having some troubles. I don't come to this work without some experience of heartbreak, and this is actually some literal heartbreak. So back in 2007, back in the aught sevens, I was working on a couple writing projects, and I was just feeling like I had a lot of back pain. It was tremendous and horrible, and I could not sit up straight. I could not sleep. I could not focus. And it was worrisome up to a point, but I'm a person that sort of just muddles through stuff and we'll figure out what's wrong later. You know, I've got work to do, I've got other commitments. And so I just let it do its thing. But it was getting so bad that I couldn't sit still. I couldn't lay down. I couldn't find a position that was comfortable. And finally, my partner was like, you have got to do something about this. So I called to ask a nurse or whatever it's called. And she was like, well, it's really nothing to worry about, you know, as long as this, that, and the other thing doesn't happen. As long as you don't have, I think it was a fever, trouble breathing, or a high heart rate. So all those things started to happen. And I still was dismissive. My partner was like, look, we got to go to the ER. You don't seem well. And I'm still joking and laughing about it. I decided to smoke a bunch of pot because I thought, hey, maybe that'll help. It did for a little bit. And so I was like, okay, fine, let's just go. And I went, and they were kind of dismissive. Imagine anybody who is in a female presenting body sometimes has that experience, I've heard. A little dismissive. Oh, you've got gas. Oh, it's walking pneumonia, all these things. But here's the trick. My heart was going about 180 to 200 beats a minute, depending on who told me what was going on. That is very, very fast. It is twice as fast, more than twice as fast as your heart is supposed to go. And they couldn't figure out why. Just couldn't figure out. And I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I still have a lot of disjointed memories of this day. So they decided to do the one thing that they knew would help your heart, and that is to stop it. They told me, here, we're going to give you a drug and we're going to stop your heart. And I was like, well, that sounds dramatic. I mean, I'm still joking at this point. I said, that sounds dramatic. What's that going to feel like? And they said, well, I mean, we're stopping your heart, so it's going to feel like probably the worst 7 seconds of your life, or death, I guess, as it were. And I was like, okay. And then all these people are sort of surrounding me. It's the respiratory team, just in case they need to resuscitate me. I mean, spoiler alert, I'm okay. So we can skip. Everything worked out. So they gave me the drug. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Nothing happened. I felt fine. I didn't feel different. Nothing happened. My heart was still pounding away, pounding away. And I was like, okay, well, what do we do next? They're like, well, I guess we're going to do that again. Wait, what? So they did it again. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Nothing happened. So it was still a pretty big mystery. But in those moments of terror, and in those moments of my partner couldn't even be next to me, he was on the other side of the room freaking out, and I'm laughing and joking. I'm like, it's gonna be fine. It was, thank goodness. But that was the moment where I realized how strong my heart is. I mean, metaphorically, of course. Also physically. And that was also the beginning of recognizing how precious this life is and how much it requires of me to be present and to finally seek out the magic that I kind of put off until then. Let's talk about me for a second. This is the part that I think is helpful for folks to ground context into why this is so important to me, not just that story. So some folks like to hear where folks come from in their witchcraft or their paganism or their beliefs. So I was a hardcore Catholic when I was growing up. And I mean that in the most Madonna sort of way. Like I love the rosaries and I love the images and the iconography. I'm saying that wrong. And iconography. I loved all that. Loved the rituals, loved the candles, loved the incense. Thought it was amazing. As I grew up, I realized that God was a bit of a chauvinist. And so I decided to move away from that. One of my first papers in college was God as a chauvinist. And I sort of wandered for a while. I knew that I wanted ritual in my life. I knew that I wanted something to believe in that was bigger than me. And I knew that to a certain extent, the concepts of belief and devotion and sacrifice were important. And I eventually sort of ran into this crowd of New Age folks in the Midwest where I lived. And there we sort of started to explore, you know, sort of the love and light, the crystals, the Reiki, and all of that, which was great. And it opened me up to something different. It opened me up to this one store that doesn't exist anymore called Rainbows and Roses, which is hilarious to me because Irisanya is for the goddess of the rainbow and roses are for my work with Aphrodite. So the universe is fun. So I found my first coven through that store. I worked with the book called Spiral Dance with them. More on that later. And eventually, you know, covens break up, things happen, hearts get broken throughout all of this. And I had to come back to my own space and to spend a lot of time with Scott Cunningham, Raven Buckland books, and Lorena McKennett, a bunch of incense and salt and all the things that are great. But all of that wasn't quite enough for me. And I knew that there was something else that was sort of calling to me. And then that heart thing happened. And then the next year, my partner went to school with somebody who was an organizer at California Witch Camp, which is a week-long camp in Mendocino, where you take classes, do ritual, and basically immerse yourself, no cell signal, immerse yourself in magic. The website, I think, says life-changing. It is. It was. I ended up going in 2008. And reclaiming is my home. And I knew it was my home, the very first ritual, where I looked deep into the eyes of some stranger. I knew no one at this camp, no one. I went completely not knowing anyone. I looked into the eyes of a stranger and felt connected to something so much wider than I had ever experienced. And then I came back from that covered in mosquito bites, got my first tattoos, talked about how I love the runes and all of the things. And I tried to explain this to people and they thought I was out there. But then I started taking the classes. Then I started teaching. And eventually I got initiated into reclaiming, which is not the same as in other traditions, but it's something that people recognize. So I say all that to say it's been a long and winding road, and my heart has done a lot, has been hurt a lot, has felt a lot. And there's no way I can cover all of it. But I wanted to give at least a hint as to what brought me here today. Other things that you might want to know about me. I'm an author. I have written a couple of books. These are the ones that I have in my hands, at least right now. There are 2 others that are done, but not printed. I can't even tell. It's fine. So I'll yammer about those later if folks are interested. But basically, I didn't realize I was writing these books and actually writing about heart magic along the way. So this is why I bring this up. I'm a witch. I am a reclaiming witch. I also study fairy, F-E-R-I. I'm also a teacher. Not as much of a fan of the word teacher. I say facilitator of sacred experiences. I think that's much more helpful. I'm a priestess. I plan rituals. I've helped folks with rites of passage. I continuously explore the idea of pagan clergy. I have been an organizer in my community. I have helped with spiral dance, done a lot of things. And also I'm a death care worker. That's a newer thing. Also, I consider myself a grief priestess. So it seems like that might be necessary in this world right now. There's a lot to grieve and there's a lot emerging, I think. So today, again, I'm looking at the sort of the comments. So if you want to say things, ask things as we go along. If it feels right to answer, I totally will. If it doesn't, we'll leave it till the end. But I love seeing folks sort of interact because I might be the person here who's put together a presentation, but I learn way more from everybody else. So if there's something that pops or zings, I'd love to hear about it. If you're watching this later, reach out to me. I'm always happy to interact. I'm on all the social medias. There aren't a lot of, I don't think there's any Irisanyas, so it's pretty easy to find me. Something you should know before we go ahead, because I realized I didn't say this, I have a really dry sense of humor, and so I will often mock myself as I'm doing things. I'm a little irreverent. So I also make faces. So that's also very enjoyable. I want to talk about reclaiming for a second because I know that this conference and whoever else might be interested in these things. Great, we'll talk about death care towards the end. Good deal. I could talk about that ad nauseum. But we're going to talk about the heart, which totally fits into things. So I want to talk about reclaiming because there are a lot of incorrect things out there, and I want to discuss those. And so reclaiming witchcraft, there's a lot of different versions of history of our tradition. So I'm going to tell you what I think I know to be true in this point. It's a really big tradition at this point. It's also very new. So there are, a lot of stories based on who was in different parts of it at different times, just to be clear. So that makes it confusing. Also, there's a lot of, the internet saves everything. So the internet has a lot of things about reclaiming as a Dianic tradition. Reclaiming as this. Reclaiming was founded by Z Budapest. Reclaiming was this. No. Nobody, no. We are, so the way I hold it, all reclaiming witches might have a different viewpoint. So I am aware that I am going to be treading in sacred waters. Reclaiming is often attributed to Starhawk and Starhawk alone. She did not do this work alone. She did this work with a lot of other folks, and I wanted to present some of their names. This is not everybody. I'm going to say some more names because I'm thinking of them as I'm sitting here, but it was a collective. It was a big group of folks who were looking to empower their activism with witchcraft. This was in the midst of goddess spirituality coming back full circle. It was in the midst of WTO, Diablo Canyon. It was in the midst of a lot of things going around in the Bay Area. California, USA. So it was Starhawk and Maca Nightmare and Oak, Rosemary Dance, who actually passed last year, Raven Moonshadow, who passed a while ago, Gwydion, Madrone, Ann Hill, Thorn Coil was around. All of these folks worked together to, again, unify, politics with activism, with witchcraft, with things to empower change in the world. So Reclaiming was a collective for a while, which means it was a big and then became a very unwieldy group. It was hard to, how do we unify this group with so many voices and so many experiences? There were roots in activism, roots in social justice, goddess spirituality, fairy, feminism, a whole bunch of different things. I talk about it a bit in this book. That sounds super cheesy, but it's also helpful because I sometimes have to look back at it. This book is Reclaiming Witchcraft. It's my first one. We came out of all these different places. How do we unify ourselves, and how does this become a tradition? So the story that I know is that at one point, Starhawk was, I think, at a witch camp or some sort of outdoor gathering, and sort of had this hit that we need to disband the collective so that it can spread outwards, and so that it's not so centrally focused in the Bay Area, which is what everybody attributes it to. I get it. Spiral Dance is a book that sort of, I don't want to say codified, but brought together a lot of the things that we use in our tradition. But it was also written a minute ago. And so it's not the end all be all at this point. So they dissolved the collective and thus started the tradition. Dates are fuzzy, 80s-ish. Other stories that you might want to know is that Starhawk and Diane Baker were, they were part of the goddess spirituality movement, and Starhawk was teaching classes at one of the colleges, universities, and they decided to get people together to teach them how to do ritual. How do you do ritual? How do you make sacred in this everyday life? And that became the first core class of Reclaiming. It was Elements of Magic, is what we know now. Teaching people how to do ritual, teaching how to plan, how to hold the elements, how to work with each other in consensus, how to hopefully work in a non-hierarchical way. We strive. It's hard, right? Humans are hard. In order to unify folks, a bunch of folks got together, and blessings on this work. I have no idea how they did this. But they created the Principles of Unity, which is a document that basically says, if you can get behind all this stuff, you can call yourself a reclaiming witch. That is the only thing. You don't need to be initiated to be a priestess. You don't need to be initiated to teach a class. You don't have to be initiated to jump up and do a role in a ritual or organize any of that. Everyone's welcome, no matter where you are. So the Principles of Unity, which I can definitely share a link to, is an evolving document. It has changed a few times over the time that I've known about it. And it most recently now includes a very strong statement about anti-racism. And because our tradition has had, I'm going to say this, some challenges with the way that we hold BIPOC folks in our tradition, which is frustrating because our tradition had a lot of BIPOC folks in its founding. Don't want to open up that whole can of worms. It is the magic of my heart, but that's not what we're talking about. So our tradition is also spread out. It's beyond the Bay Area. It is out into, North America, so Canada, into South America, Brazil. I think there's Costa Rica, the UK, and France, and Germany, and Belgium, and I think there's somebody in Portugal, and it's been around there. I'm sure I'm missing something, so sorry, Reclaiming folks, if you're watching this. Also, some communities in Australia, focused in Brisbane and Melbourne, but also Sydney, and some, I think, on the western part. One of the things that's important to know, because it informs how I am as a being in this whole work, is spiritual authority is rooted in community. So we are all our own spiritual authority. We need no one to define the divine for us. However, that does not mean that we get to do whatever the heck we want. Am I allowed to swear? I just realized I didn't ask that because I'm going to, probably. We need no one to define the sacred for us. And so that means that my spiritual authority might encourage me to act in a certain way, or to believe a certain thing, or to be connected with something in a certain way. And that's great within the confines of the principles of unity. But that means I need to be aware of my impact on other folks. I need to be aware that if my spiritual authority wants me to wave my arms all over the place, that's fantastic. If I hit someone, it's not. So how can we be aware of each other in all of this? And then the last thing I want to say about reclaiming is, that whole spiral dance book, that is definitely something that we still turn to and use as a foundational text. My book just expands a little bit more on, because people are like, how the heck is reclaiming structured? Here are some of the ways. Although I wrote this book and literally 6 months later, they changed the principles of unity. And so, which is great. I guess I was part of it too. We changed the principles of unity and updated it. So that book was out of date by the time it got printed. We're an evolving tradition because we're a living tradition. I hope that's helpful for folks. But let's move on. Let's move on to their stuff. So however you are, wherever you are in this moment, I have an image of a heart, and I'm just going to take you through a short little practice of becoming more present today. So it might feel good for you to put a hand on your heart. It might feel good for you to put a hand on your thigh. It might feel good for you to do something else that's just comforting. This is not a moment. You don't have to close your eyes or anything. You can, but you don't have to. I just want to invite you to tap into where you are right now. I don't just mean physically, but also that. I want you to tap into where your heart is right now. If the second you started to pay attention to it, you noticed, oh, it's moving a little fast. Or wow, I'm really grounded right now. What does it feel like right now? What sensations are living there right now? This is not a moment to change them or even judge them or figure out what it all means. This is a moment for noticing, for becoming present. In a society that wants us so badly to be out of our bodies and stuck in our minds, can we become present again with our body? For folks who aren't visual, maybe there is a texture. Maybe there's a texture of sensation. Maybe there is a temperature change. Maybe you immediately see colors. I love people who can see stuff when I talk about this. I endeavor. I'm more of a feeling. I have words pop out. Maybe you notice right away that your heart's like, oh, I need more coffee or less coffee or a hug. Maybe your heart is chock full of emotions. For myself, sometimes I get way more emotional on the weekends because I have time to feel stuff. I jokingly say that I often have sad girl Saturdays or sad girl Sundays. Maybe there's an emotion that's living there today. Or maybe somewhere deep in your heart, or maybe right on the surface, there's something your heart is whispering at you, whispering to you, or screaming at you. Maybe in this moment, you might just listen. I love that image of a sunflower. Definitely need more coffee. I'm with you, friend. But I don't want to talk so quickly that I'm done in 20 minutes. So just allow that experience to be what it is. Maybe it continues for you. Maybe you check in with your heart as we go along. I encourage that. I know I'm doing that. Ooh, I love the colors are happening for folks. Good for you. Love it. So what the heck is magic of the heart? Well, to be honest, I want to tell you this really grandiose story. I feel like it's informed by my history, but really I did it because I was heartbroken. I was sitting at this very desk and I was signing divorce paperwork. And I was like, I am heartbroken. And I had this thought in my head, and it's the first post I ever made on this, was like, I decided to investigate the heart. Because if a thing like this can get broken, if a piece of me can be hurt in this way, I wanted to know everything about it. I wanted to know what it felt like, what made it beat, how many chambers there were. I wanted to like dissect this. And I wanted to know as much as I could. I mean, to a certain extent, it was kind of an offhanded comment. I just sort of was like, I'm going to find out everything about this because I don't think I was actively looking at healing, but I was looking at this hurts so bad that there must be a way to learn that can hold me throughout this process, which is ongoing, friends. I am not a healed being. I don't think we ever quite heal from things like that. I think we learn how to hold them. And that's where this comes in. But magic of the heart for me is a practice. It's an investigation. It's a way to ground into the places of life and death and everything in between. I call it a place of hope and rest and resilience and restoration and connection. It is a work in progress, just as we all are, which used to really bug me, but now I'm like, oh, thank goodness, I don't have to be anywhere just yet. I can still figure it out. In this moment, this practice, tool, investigation, journey, way of being, way of making it in this world looks like 3 different parts at this point. I think there's actually a 4th part that I sort of found last night before all of this was solidified. So you're gonna get to join me in that emergence of that. But right now, originally it was like 3 things. So here are the 3 things. First things first, we're gonna be talking about the way that we devote to ourselves and to our hearts. So self-devotion. How we might devote to something divine. And that is however you define the divine. And also, how do we devote to each other in community? Because we don't do this work alone, and we can't do this work alone. Even though everything in my body wants to, because I am the person who is like, I will just take care of it and do it. If you're like that, join me in this challenge. So magic of the heart is evolving and emerging. So what I say today, I might say something different tomorrow, and that's fantastic. May we have many more heartbeats in which we can explore what this might mean for us. So I have another quote from my Instagram page. It's one of my favorites. Give me life, give me pain, give me myself again. Tori Amos, the sage, the wise one. I think that I can't move ahead without saying, you know, why are we working on this now? At least the question that often came to me when I was thinking about this and thinking about sharing it and just decided to say it on a whole bunch of podcasts, even though I had no idea what I was talking about. It's so important right now. This world is just the way it is right now. It is crucial, I think, to at least tap into or make contact with these matters of love and heart, because I think that they are interconnected with hope. I think they're interconnected with resilience. I'm starting to get really bored of that word. So if you are too, I feel you. I haven't figured out another one yet. This work seems on the surface to be very simple, possibly even meaningless, possibly superficial. But there are so many other things in this world. Why are we talking about this? It's not superficial. It is inspiration. It is fuel. And to be fair, love and heart, matters of the heart, drive us for better or for worse. So the thing that the phrase that I like to say is that, you know, love spells still matter. Everything that we do is part of a spell, I think. Everything that we do could be something that creates joy and beauty in the world. So why now? Why the heck not? Why not always? Or as in many pockets as you can. So love connects us, either in its experience or in its longing and everything in between. I work with Aphrodite a lot, so I believe that love is the first magic. I think of whatever creation story you tell, there is some moment of complete chaos, and from that chaos, love is born. It becomes one of the first things that sometimes is brought, or love is the reason for some of the things that transpire. So yeah, super important. Yeah, I can't remember the last time I had a hug to friend, Jenny, so I understand. All of this work, tapping into the heart, enables hope, forms boundaries, identifies priorities, and builds trust. That's a real thick sentence, and I know it. So again, you want a copy of this later to unpack that for yourself, more than happy to share. Love and matter, this magic of the heart fuels connection with the divine. I don't care how you define that. I don't care if you work with gods or you don't, if you work with water, if you work with a wonderful tree, your pet, anything. You work with something, an emotion, or you work with an energy. Groovy, absolutely groovy. Love fuels community connection. And this heart magic fuels that ability to connect with other folks. And also, I truly believe without tapping into this, without love and without this presence of what is important to you, we can't fuel our activism as well, because without love for whatever you're up in arms about, what the heck am I fighting for? If this keeps us going, think about all the really stupid things people have done for the love of some other person. You know, it fuels a lot of energy and it fuels a lot of decisiveness. This is really important in a world where stuff is going sideways. I need to know what matters in order to take action and to take sustained action. I often say that life is a love spell, and I can expand upon that later, but it is the overall dance of connection and remembering connection and belonging. I wrote a song once called Life is a Love Spell. We belong to the light, we belong to dark. It is a spell of belonging. So first things first on this beautiful work of heart magic, we start with self-devotion. This used to be self-care. I am so annoyed by that phrase now. I appreciate it and understand that not everybody feels that way. That's fine. Take what you want, leave the rest. I think self-care to me in the current culture has become very discreet. It becomes these little pockets of moments that I take care of myself, moments where I do this, and it's 10 minutes, and it's 20 minutes. I would love to encourage the possibility of self-devotion, which feels a little bit more important, feels a little bit more sacred. When I devote to something, I make a promise. I vow to take care of this wondrous being that I am. Not to the loss of everything else, alongside everything else, but it's devoting to myself, because that allows me to continually show up. It allows me to nourish myself again and again. It allows me to have boundaries. It allows me to say yes when I mean yes and no when I mean no. It allows me to see myself as someone with value and something to offer. Devoting to myself allows me to build trust in myself and in my intuition, in the beautiful being that I am, in the wondrous gift that I am to this world. And I like devotion too, because it requires consistency. Can you ever say that you've been devoted to something and then just sort of been like, nah, I'm not going to do that today? I have, just to be clear. But I think that, consistency, attention, showing up even when it's a little bit hard. It's uncomfortable for me to sometimes show up for myself by sticking to a budget, by not overscheduling myself and then wearing myself out. Is that I'm not in devotion to myself when I hurt myself. So that's one of the things that I think you don't need to start there, but it's a good place. Thinking of yourself as just as sacred and holy, I think shifts the frame and offers grace as well. So this is switching to another one of my Instagram posts. Put yourself in the way of beauty. And that's a quote from Cheryl Strayed's mother. She's the one that wrote Into the Wild. It was on a podcast. Cheryl Strayed was talking about her mom. Put yourself in the way of beauty. I can't think of a better way to acknowledge devotion to yourself. So for folks, I'm a writer, so I'm always going to have journal questions, even though I'm not the best journaler. I try. I'm going to offer some journal questions. We're not going to do them in this moment, but just think about a few things. How do you care for those that you love? Sometimes that's a great question to begin with. How can you care for yourself in the same ways? What do you allow in your life? What might you release or step away from? How do you consider yourself sacred and holy? And could you consider this? So on this next slide, most of my slides have pictures of various hearts. So this has a heart that's entangled in a spider web. What a cool picture. So the next part of Magic of the Heart, the way I hold it in this moment, is about divine devotion. So this is some sort of connection to divine. I don't like to define this for folks. I believe, want, and hope that you find that for yourself. I work with deities and gods. I work with a whole bunch of them. So that works for me, but I'm just as divinely inspired by the ocean, if sometimes more. For me, the point of this in this whole heart magic escapade is that it's learning to continue to create and cultivate relationships with something outside of humans. Humans are messy. Humans are frustrating sometimes, and they're also glorious and wondrous, like all of you here. But how can we also learn to cultivate relationships with something that's beyond us? I don't do hierarchy when it comes to divine. I don't do the gods are above me. I am in devotion to many a god, but I am not in supplication. I left that when I left Christianity. So when I talk about the divine, it's about cultivating a relationship with something that has a longer history of knowing. You know, if I think of gods, I think of them not being bound by time, gender, story, how we've interpreted stories. They have a wider knowing. And so I want to cultivate a relationship with that. When I'm stuck in my humanness and stuck in my inability to be creative, the only way I have understanding of the world around me, I'm very limited as a human in my understanding. Thank goodness. I thank goodness I know that, or at least I remember that a lot. That my ancestors, my beloved dead, my mighty dead, did a lot more before I was around, and I can feel them continuing to do stuff now. So if I can tap into that energy, that really informs the way I can hold myself and hold myself in this world. But it's about relationship. This isn't about we go to the gods, we ask them for stuff, and then they give us stuff, and then great. It is a relationship. You know, how we relate to one thing is how we relate to everything. So taking my own experiences with relationship, I think about, you know, how do I get to know somebody? You know, I mean, today it seems like Google, but I think that actually is pretty valid. I've Googled many a god and said, what's your story? Did a background checks, so to speak. You know, finding out about them, finding out about what stories are being told, finding out what sort of ways they are celebrated, even worshiped, figuring out what they might like. You know, yes, I don't have altars to my best friends, but like I definitely have altars to gods. And would that be the worst thing to have an altar to your friendships? I don't know. I'm gonna bookmark that for myself for later. Maybe having an altar to different divine things, whomever, whatever they are, bringing them things that they might like, singing songs, you know, building a relationship based on, I think you might like this. I want to do this for you. I think all of this helps us to acknowledge that the divine is everywhere. And even in the times where it feels like we are so earth-shatteringly alone, that we're not. And I think one of the most important things in divine devotion in this whole practice is that it's about listening. I think it's also about patience, and it's about sitting in the liminal spaces where we don't get answers right away. I know that for myself, I adore technology a lot of the time, but it gives me a lot of instantaneous answers, and I forget that that's not the way it always works. Often it's not. So the divine devotion also reminds me to slow down, become present, show up for a relationship because I want to be there, not because I'm getting something from it. So with all of this, some questions you might think about, unsurprisingly, how do I define the divine, name it or know it? How do I come into relationship with this divine? How can I dance in reciprocation? Who might be good divine partner or partners for me? What do I bring to the relationship? Because you're part of it too. A relationship is not just what the divine brings. And am I expecting something in return? And just be honest about that. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't want to sound too judgy, maybe a little, but how can I show up for a relationship without necessarily receiving things? That's been a great lesson for me. I have a long wound or practice of thinking that relationships are sort of, tit for tat. And that's not how I want to show up in the world anymore. And part of this practice has really helped me with that. Showing up because I want to, because it's valuable for me and hopefully for the other being. So moving along to another Instagram post. Being human is not hard because you're doing it wrong. It's hard because you're doing it right. And this quote is from Glennon Doyle. Unsurprisingly, the next slide is talking about community devotion. We talk about, things being hard. And community is hard. I just want to say that right off the bat, or at least that's my lens. And I actually have another quote in here because this is the quote that I always come back to when I am frustrated, when I am angry, when I feel unheard and unmet. And the quote is by David Mitchell. Our lives are not our own. We are bound to others, past and present. And by each crime and every kindness, we birth our future. We're all connected, whether we like it or not. And we can't, and we don't do this work alone. This is a practice that is probably the one I focus on the most because it feels challenging for me. I didn't always grow up in places where I felt safe to be myself, and maybe you're like that too. And sometimes the communities that I'm in, I don't always feel safe. So I'm actively finding ways to cultivate community and that is safe and that also allows for me to get feedback and for other folks to get feedback. Accountability is a really grand thing. I think during the pandemic, it's been really, I think this has been on my mind a lot. How do I cultivate community when I'm not, shoulder to shoulder with somebody? Well, I've learned badly sometimes, but also I've been closer to people because of this, because we've had to work a little bit harder. We've had to be a little bit more clear about what works, what's needed, what's required, timing across different time zones, across different energy levels, different folks' physical and emotional needs. So in a way, I have learned a lot during this pandemic. I don't know if other folks have. It's required a lot of Zoom. Who knew that Zoom was going to be a part of community care? One of the books that I wrote was talked a lot about like self-devotion and self-care before I threw that phrase out the window for me. The trick with writing is that once it's in print, I don't know about anybody else who writes, I change my mind later on. So what I didn't include in that book was about community care. So community care is just as important as all of this. Yes, self-devotion, yes, divine, but also there's all these humans and we all need each other. So I think about mutual aid. I think about mutual aid in magic and in life. How can I share resources with folks? How can I show up for folks in a way that feels good? Just last weekend, I was co-teaching a class, my first class in person in a few years. And I offered this practice of folks sort of stating their needs and things that they might want in that moment or in the future. And then other folks would gather around them when they felt like they could genuinely, authentically help that person with that need. So you had to think about it, can I give this energy to folks? But it was so wondrous to see people be so willing to be there for folks that they don't really know. And to promise over the course of a certain period of time, I don't want to divulge all the things for folks, but to promise over a certain period of time, I'm going to show up for you in a way that feels good for you. So everybody talked about their needs, what might sound good, what they, how they want to be communicated with, all of that. So thinking about that sort of practice, and like, it's not just about coming together to talk about, the problems of what's on the outside. It's also us. Like, what do I need? What do you need? How can I show up for you? I can't do it now, but here's what I could do. Making sure that's an ongoing conversation is part of all this magic and allows us all to weave ourselves together. And I put in this slide, share the burdens as much as the blessings. So some journal questions for this, for community devotion. Who do you consider community? That's a big stinking question. Who do you want in your community? The cultivation of community is a question. How do you show up in your community? Right now in the chat, we're sharing virtual hugs, which I absolutely adore. I mean, this has been like the virtual hug of the pandemic for me. Oh, that's great. Thanks, Amber. What talents do you bring to your community? I think I may have already said, what resources can you share? I'll say it again because I looked away and forgot where I was. And then the last question, which is always the one that I have to interrogate, is can you set down this, the idea of rugged individualism, or at least interrogate it in your life? We could go into this for a very long time. But I experience, and I feel like I live in a culture of pull yourself up by the bootstraps and you'll figure it out. And that has been biting during the pandemic for me, because I've been alone for the majority of it. Well, I have my cats, but still, they're, okay at all this, but it could be better. They've learned a lot. Can I set down the idea that I need to do this alone? And even if that's something that's going to take my whole lifetime to interrogate, my entire lifetime to set down because of all of the trust issues, can I try just a little bit more each year, each day? Let's try every year. That's probably a little bit more realistic. So this is one of my favorite parts of doing presentations or teachings with folks. I'm going to offer an experiential experience. I am not the hugest fan of talking at people. I would rather encourage folks to go into experiences and figure out what's true for them. But I did want to also set the stage for what the heck I'm talking about. So I want to invite the possibility that we can all do a little trance together. And for me, that looks like kind of guiding you a little bit, but then sort of having this moment where I just am silent for a bit so that you can have an experience, not too long. And then I'll call you back when it's time to come back. So know that if you've never done this before, you're going to do it perfectly. Know that if you don't have a big, huge experience, I want to remind you of spiritual authority and that your experience is going to be exactly what it needs to be and doesn't have to look like anyone else's. And quite frankly, you don't know what anybody else's experiences are. So there's no need for comparison. So I'm going to invite you to get comfortable where you are. And this might mean shifting your position. For some folks, it might mean closing your eyes. You don't have to. There's no need. But just taking maybe a few breaths. They don't have to be deep They can just be exactly as they have been. This is an invitation into experience, into the chambers of your heart. I can't tell you what all of your magic is, nor do I want to. But I do want you to find it and to make contact with it. And that takes getting a little bit quieter, maybe a little bit stiller. So it might make sense for you to, maybe you do start taking a few deep breaths, but you don't have to. Maybe you need to shake your body real quick to get a little extra energy out, but you don't have to. The reclaiming way of trance is do what makes sense for you. And maybe you follow what I say, and maybe you don't. But however you are, whenever you are right now, I want to invite you to maybe bring your awareness or your attention down to your feet. And just let that awareness just be there. There's no need to make sense. There's no need to measure. There's no need to explain anything. Just notice what's there. Just notice how you are. There's no need to change or fix. But maybe if there's anything there that doesn't need to be there, just allow it to drop, to sink, to fall away. And allow that awareness to travel the glorious length of your leg, maybe moving from your feet along your calf and the front of your lower leg, over your knee, traveling up the space of your thigh, maybe traveling up to the space of your pelvic bowl and that space between your hip bones. Maybe things are swirling a little bit. And just notice how all of this is for you today, in this moment, in this time, without trying to change it or fix it. And allow anything that doesn't need to be there to drop, to sink, to fall away. And allowing your awareness to travel up your body, traveling up through the space of digestion, maybe starting to tickle the edge of your ribs and maybe make a journey over those. And maybe allowing your awareness or your attention to settle in your chest and into your heart, that courageous heart. And just notice what lives there in this moment. There's no need to change or fix. But if there's anything that doesn't need to be here, allow it so easily to drop, to sink, to fall away. And then awareness travels again, maybe up across your collarbone, back of your neck, down each arm from shoulder to elbow to fingertip and thumb. traveling these wide spaces of expression and arms that hold. And just notice what lives there right now. There's no need to change it or fix it. And allow anything that doesn't need to be there to drop, to sink, to fall away. And traveling once more, this awareness, this attention, this intention, allowing it to travel along your neck, your jaw, maybe you loosen your jaw a little bit, traveling around the space of your eye sockets, your forehead, and traveling up to the top of your head to that space that was soft when you were born. And just notice what lives in the skull of yours in this moment. Without trying to change it or fix it. And allow anything that doesn't need to be here to drop, to sink, to fall away. And from this place, I invite you, with all of the ways that you know yourself, with all of the ways that you know how to expand and widen your perspective, allow this awareness, this attention, this intention to spread out as wide as you like, stretching out to horizons, or maybe you stretch out into moonscapes, into the stars, into the places of creation, into the places of destruction. And I invite you to expand this awareness out to a place that you recognize, that you know. Maybe it's a physical place, maybe it is a place of your emotion, a place of your wisdom. Maybe this is a moment to travel to that space, or perhaps you just arrive because you can, because this space knows your name, because it has been calling your name this whole time. And maybe this is a space that you can see. Maybe it's a space that you can feel. Maybe it's a space that you know is home because you just do. Wherever you arrive, remember that you belong. Wherever you arrive, remember that you belong. Wherever you arrive, remember that you belong. And I invite you in this space to take a few moments to maybe tap into the question of, what does my heart need right now? Or what is the magic I'm bringing to the world? Or if you're like me, sometimes I just ask, what do I need to know? and allow anything that arrives to arrive. You might have a being arrive, you might have a feeling, a word, a flash, or it might just be really quiet. I invite you to just take a few moments to be in this space and know that I'll say something when it's time to return. And recognizing that people come in and out of this. I'll just keep my voice in here sometimes. This silence is intentional right now. What does my heart need? What might I need to know? What is the magic I can bring into this world? Or anything that seems ready to be asked. Trusting yourself, trusting your heart. And beginning to think about what you've collected in this moment or in these moments. Maybe reaching out your awareness or your attention, your intention to see if there's anything else. Anything else that needs to come back with you. Anything that might need a little clarification. Anything that is perfectly shaped and prepared for you. But the truth is, we can't stay in this space forever, though we could always return. You could return to this recording. You could guide yourself back to the place that you know and that knows you. But for now, however you arrived in your belonging, however you landed, I invite you to return. To return via the path or way that led you. Return down the path or the way that led you, that welcomed you. And begin to return back to your head, to that place of knowing. And when you're back at your head, start to reel in, pull in, gather in all the ways in which you may have expanded and spread out. All that attention that maybe you threw to the horizon or to the starry night. Begin to bring that back in, bring it back in, bring it back in to your head. Allow your attention to come back to your body, come back to your head. Come back, come back. Come back to your jaw, come back to your neck, come back, come back. Down your neck, down your arms, come back, come back. Travel back through your rib cage and your chest and your beating, beautiful heart. Come back, come back. Traveling down the space of digestion and will and power. Come back, come back. Traveling into the space of pelvic bowl. Come back, come back. Traveling down the space of thighs and knees and calves and feet. Come back, come back. And open your eyes if they are closed. Maybe touch your body and remind yourself that you are a human being in this present moment, that you do need to come back from the places that you travel. And maybe some folks find it comforting and reassuring and helpful to say their name out loud or to do something incredibly logical to bring themselves back from a trance. So thinking about what's on your nightstand, what is the last thing you got in the mail, anything like that. But allowing yourself to come back to this moment, to this delightful virtual place in which we find ourselves. So this is a moment, it's invitation, it's not an expectation. It's an invitation to share in the chat what you might have experienced. Always fun to hear things, but don't have to. One of the things, if you're watching this later, this is a great moment to pause everything and write things down. This might be a moment that you might just kind of grab a journal, write some stuff down, things that you might explore later. And if you were like, I didn't really get anything from that, that's fine. That happens. I've gotten that many a time. What I will offer, if you're a person that has that and are sort of feeling disappointed about that, I sometimes get things from trances like later in a dream, in those weird moments of deja vu, where I'll be doing something, I'll be like, oh, that was like the trance that I did. Wait. So that's always a possibility too. One of the things that I think is helpful in all of this work is finding a place of safety and comfort, like this space in trance that you can come back to really nurture your heart. And it allows for all of this magic to be even more powerful and alive in us, because we know that there are places that we can return that can hold us and can hold all of our questioning, can hold all of our curiosity, can just hold us sometimes. We don't have to figure anything out all the time. Sometimes you can just be, you can just belong, you can just arrive. That's beautiful, Jenny. I'm originally from Michigan, so that's very sweet. I like hearing that about that land. Heart rock, yes. Also, another thing I encourage folks to do is over the course of whatever days make sense to you, keep an eye out, because I think hearts tend to show up a lot after I talk about this with folks, and curious to see what things might show up for you. Always curious. I'm probably more able to be connected with. That's really bad grammar. You can find me fairly easily and send things to me if you want to share stuff with me. I'm a big fan of the confidential sharings, but I'm always willing, within my own boundaries, to hold space for folks if they have things that they might want to have held or seen or witnessed, anything like that. So I'll just keep watching the thing in case anything pops up. Again, no pressure ever. So we're coming back to another one of my Instagram posts. Perhaps someday I'll crawl back home, beaten, defeated, but not as long as I can make stories out of my heartbreak, beauty out of sorrow. Sylvia Plath, of course. Of course, in this moment, I want to share another quote, and I cannot remember who said it, but there is a quote, and you can look this up. When your heart is broken, make art with the pieces. Again, I've used this quote a lot. The name of the source escapes me. But I bring this up in this moment because sometimes excavating our hearts and trying to reconnect with the magic that they are unleashes grief, unleashes, I love that somebody handed you something from Halloween and said, hey, it's okay, you're fine. I love that. Now I want some candy. We're going to do that afterwards. But it unleashes a lot of emotions. And there's a lot of things that we've, I don't want to say hidden, but have sort of sometimes gotten stuck, maybe hidden. So I offer that there is beauty within all of that. And that is really maybe the emotional essence of my work. There's beauty in all of it. It sucks. It hurts sometimes. And we're not alone. So this next slide is talking about, I think it makes total sense, but I don't know what that makes sense to you. I think hearing that, hey, it's okay and you're fine is always a good message. It's always a good message. That's the one I like to hear the most. So getting to the heart of it all, on this slide, there's another picture of some earthy being, earthiness that looks like a heart. I guess I just want folks to step away from this, walk away from this, float away from this, knowing that you are worthy of your own devotion and care. That is a magical practice. You are part of an ongoing divine conversation, and that you're not alone, and that we're not alone. And that this is my emerging fourth chamber, because there's 4 chambers in the heart. So I already talked about 3 things, and I was like, what's the 4th? I think hope is the 4th chamber. I think that it is, with all of this, what now? How do we keep going in the midst of all the things that want us to not do that? How do we keep going? Because heart work is ongoing. Beat after beat, beat after beat. Hopefully we get a whole bunch of heartbeats to actually experience all this, to, I don't know if heal, but maybe learn to hold things. I sometimes, but sometimes I inch away from healing, because healing feels like we heal something and then we don't think about it again. I know that's not the way it works, but that's the way my brain interprets it. So I want to think more about, like, how can we hold things differently? Thinking more about, that practice of the broken pot, and use gold to sort of accentuate where things are broken. Love that. But this is heart work that's ongoing. It is an exploration. I love that we're sharing hugs in the chat. Thank you so much. I'm sharing heart hugs with everyone because if we were all doing this in person, I would be inviting that as part of this practice right now. You know, can we be heart to heart right now? Can we drop whatever whatever gets in the way of us not showing what we really need, what we really want, and what we're really able to do? So this is a longer quote, and I have different things on my screen, so it makes it a little challenging to see the whole thing all at once. But let me see if I can find it in my sheets of information that I've totally ignored throughout this whole thing. So people have various feelings about Brene Brown. That's cool, totally get it. There are a lot of things that she has said that have really hit me in this whole heart work. Her book, Atlas of the Heart, has a lot of amazing things to say. So that's my little suggestion if folks are interested in that work. I'm informed by that. I'm informed by a book called Heart Medicine. I moved it to a different room, so I couldn't tell you who wrote it. But this quote right here hit me about hope, because when Vanessa and I talked, we talked a lot about like the hope colored glasses, and I was totally going to wear some today. Forgot. I really am fueled by hope. I know that sometimes people see that as being Pollyanna-ish, but darn it, no. And oh, they're talking about the heart on Jupiter. Thank you. Virtual glasses, love it. Thank you. But I want to bring this back to hope. So here's the quote. I'm going to read it out loud. Some folks can't see these things or don't want to read a whole big block of text. Don't blame you. So this is the quote from her book, Rising Strong. So she says, in my work, I found that moving out of powerlessness and even despair requires hope. Hope is not an emotion. It's a cognitive process, a thought process made up of what researcher C.R. Snyder called the trilogy of goals, pathways, and agency. Hope happens when we can set goals, have the tenacity and perseverance to pursue those goals. I would also say the resources, and believe in our own abilities to act. Snyder also found that hope is learned when boundaries, consistency, and support are all in place. Children learn it from their parents. But even if we don't get it as kids, we can still learn hope as adults. It's just tougher when we're older because we have to resist and unlearn old habits, like the tendency to give up when things get tough. So I think I'm saying in all of this that Magic of the Heart is an activation as much as it is an invitation. And I think that's really coming up in my work right now. It's sort of not in a negative, insidious way, but in an insidious way. I've already mentioned that in the past weekend, I got to teach in person again, and Joanna Macy's work came up again and again. And I think when we talk about hope, I need to bring her up. A lot of her work, the way I interpret it, talks about, having hope in the midst of despair, in the midst of despair about ecological crisis, and watching the physical world change. A lot of people really not give a damn. In fact, it would kind of incite it, not kind of, incite it. How do we hold on to hope? How do we hold on to all that? And I want to say that the cultivation of this heart magic for me is the foundation in which I can hold on to that. I can hold despair alongside hope. I can hold grief alongside hope. Because when I don't sink completely into despair, I maintain my creativity. I maintain my ability to act. Because if there's nothing to hope for, why bother? So I actually left a real long chunk of time because I know I said a lot of things I could unpack. So I am so hopeful that you got something of value out of this. And I just want to tell you that I'm so glad that my heart kept going in the midst of that whole medical thing. And I hope your heart keeps going too, because we need you. Yes, you. Thanks. So questions, comments, concerns. I gotta find my mouse again. There it is. Yay.